Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. Our guest today is Elenor Hall Hayth. You probably recognize both of those names because the Halls have been around for years and years and years and generations, and so have the Hayths. Elenor, we're going to start with you first. And we're going to ask where you were born. You're not sensitive about your age. Even if you are, it won't make any difference because we're the same age, approximately. And we'll ask that first, and where you were born, and then your brothers and sisters, and go through that part of the family, then your mother's part of the family, which is also a very old family in Wadsworth, and the Hayths and so forth. So start with Elenor. You were born when and where?
In Rittman in 1930.
And when did you move to Wadsworth?
When I was two.
Two.
We moved to Pardee Street.
Pardee Street.
The house is now torn down. It's where that Dr. Poling was.
Dr. Poling
something
was
else.
But you have always been a Wadsworth resident. You
Yes.
just happen to be living in Rittman for a short period of time. All right. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. You were the last or the first or the what of the family?
The last.
The last. And who step up all the way up to the top?
My brother Jack.
Jack.
And my sister Marge.
Marjorie.
And my brother Ray. And
Ray.
my brother Nelson.
No. And of those, I think, what, 3 are still living?
Yes.
Who's living?
Marge, Jack, and me.
You, Jack, and Marge, and then Nelson and
Ray
are gone. And one of those brothers turned out to be a policeman in Wadsworth for a long time. Who was?
In the late 40s, and after he got out of the service, and in the early 50s.
And that was
Ray.
Brother Ray, and he's gone.
Yes.
And he married a Wadsworth girl as well.
Yes, Marge Deem.
Marge Deem, D-I-E-H-M.
Yes.
We have to spell all of these names because, 50 years from now, perhaps people won't know those spellings anymore. You lived on Pardee Street, and do you remember growing up on Pardee Street?
No, the only thing I remember about that was riding my bicycle around on the porch.
Around the porch, it's
Yeah,
a big
that's all
cosmos there.
That's all I remember about that. My grandfather lived with us, and he had stepped on a nail as a young man, and he had gangrene in his foot, so he used to sit a lot. And my brother was ornery, so he didn't.
Of course your brother was ornery.
He would always try to do something to protect me from him because we were always fooling around. So he'd take his cane and hook my brother's leg when he'd run by and make him fall.
Now, which grandfather was this?
My dad's dad.
Your father's father. What was his first name?
Charlie.
Charlie,
Hall.
Grandpa Charlie.
Yeah, I think it was Charlie.
Charles Hall. Your father's name was?
Raymond.
Raymond Hall.
Raymond U.
And your mother, Raymond?
Raymond U. Hall. They always had names from the Bible in those days. His middle name was Uriah.
Spell it U.
U-H-R-I-A.
Uriah. Raymond?
It ends in H, too.
H, okay. U-R-I-A-H.
Yeah.
Raymond Uriah Hall. And who was your mother?
Faye Garn. Ida Faye was her name.
Ida Faye Garn, G-A-R-N. And she was born and reared...
1891.
1891 where?
Oh, gosh.
And where did she live all of her life, though?
Mostly around River Styx.
River Styx, which of course is Wadsworth.
Yeah.
Her name has come up several times in the program. Once as being in the farms out there, and then she did something very special in her lifetime. What was that? Where did she work? When she was
work? Oh, at the telephone office.
The River Styx telephone office. Did she ever tell any stories about the River Styx telephone office?
No, just that it was fun.
It was fun.
And she talked to a lot of people.
There weren't many people in River Styx at the time. Still aren't, but there were even fewer then. And they had their own little telephone company. Do you remember where it was, or did she ever say where it was?
I never asked her.
My understanding was that it was on the corner of 49 and 57, just a little bit north of there, but I'm not positive because...
Well, I think she said it was right there, close at the crossroads.
Right to the crossroads.
So that would be about right.
In 57 and 49, which is River Styx Road and Wadsworth Road, and those roads may not be there, so geographically, it's the intersection of the road going north and south, which is 49, and the one which then intersects it going,
Goes up over the hill.
goes east and west,
Yeah.
that goes up the hill. I hope that hill will probably still be here, but you
Yeah,
never can tell.
Oh, it is
The way
now.
that's there right now, but
Yeah.
maybe 50 years from now it won't be there. Now, going back to Pardee Street, you didn't live there very long. What did you do?
Well, I guess I wasn't quite 2, or maybe it was 2 when we moved there, and then we moved up on the farm.
Tell us where the
In May.
farm was geographically, and tell us what's there
It was
now.
1 mile from the square north,
1 mile from the square
Right
north on the
to our
west side of the
driveway.
road. Pardon?
right to our driveway.
On the west side of the road.
Yes.
And what's there now?
Nothing. It's an open space.
Open space.
My
And
Masonic temple is next door. That was our orchard.
your orchard was where the Masonic Temple
And
is.
then the next group of buildings, that's where the barn bridge was, and the barn sat back away from behind the orchard, west of the orchard.
And what's there now? Just a couple stores?
Well, it's shopping.
Little
What
strip
is that?
mall.
RPM and that sort of thing.
Little strip mall. And what's behind where the farmland
Well,
was?
projects.
All kinds of houses.
Except for the one part of the woods. Jackson still owns that because there's a big valley back
Now,
there.
you mentioned Jackson. Tell us who Jackson is and what relationship he is to you.
His grandfather and my grandfather were brothers.
And who is Jackson Hall, obviously?
Jerry Hall's son.
Jerry Hall's son.
Harrison Jeremiah was his dad's
Harrison
name.
Jeremiah Hall.
Yeah.
H.J. Hall.
Yeah.
That was his father. But Jack is also H.J. Hall?
No, Jack is Jackie Dale.
Jack.
Jackie was on his birth
Oh,
certificate.
Jackie.
He gets kidded about that a lot.
Jackie Dale.
Jackie Dale Hall.
And Jack is the one who was the city treasurer at
Yes.
present time. At this point in time, he is approximately 72 years of age, right?
Yeah, he's 3 years older than my brother, I think.
And you were, did you tell us when you were born?
1930,
1930, what day?
June 4th.
June 4th. So you are now 68 years of age, is that correct?
Same as you.
No. 68 years of age. The move to the farm meant what to you? I mean, you had to have a complete change. You used to ride your tricycle on the porch, but if you wanted to ride on the sidewalk, what was the complete difference? Did you remember the difference, the impact of the difference?
Oh, the only thing I remember is the day we moved there.
And how did you move?
was,
I think it's very important to tell us what truck took you there.
Oh, H.J. Hall truck. My dad was driving a truck for him then.
Okay, your
In
father-
fact, he drove his first truck that he owned.
Your father drove
His first,
Jerry Hall's,
you know, they drive a tractor
Yes,
and a
mhm.
trailer. Dad drove his first
the
tractor.
very first tractor
Very first
trailer.
tractor he owned.
Isn't that, and what year would that have been?
Oh, before I was, no, it wasn't before I was born. I guess I don't know. It'd have to be the
In the
late
very early-
20s or
late
early
20s, early
30s. It could have
30s.
been before I was born, but he did so many things then because of the Depression. He was a fireman in Rittman. He helped build the box board, and he worked driving truck, and he helped build the Main Street, puts the bricks down. Him and his dad, when he was
Now, this
before
is
he
in
was married.
Wadsworth.
Before he was married, my dad and his dad, my grandfather, drove the cement truck for the McCourt
in Akron.
and they delivered the bricks to build Main Street to Wadsworth.
Isn't that something? Now, many people don't remember that Main Street used to be all brick.
It was all brick all the way down Match Hill.
As a matter of fact, it went out to where? Probably to the end of the city limits, didn't it, at one time?
I guess I don't know how far it went.
I kind of remember that, going out to the city limits. We'll get a phone call tonight saying the bricks went to this particular home. That'd be it. And that's fine. We appreciate those phone calls.
Well, he worked at the match too. He did anything.
Well, during
And he
the
was a
Depression, we all had to do
policeman
anything.
and a fireman and anything. And my mother worked at the laundry when we still lived in Rittman, and she would make baked goods. My brothers and sisters would deliver it. My one brother mostly would deliver it on the streets.
If you had
Hot
to-
cross buns.
Hot cross buns.
I mean, you know, that's
Surely.
what they always say. And in Wadsworth, she used to bake birthday cakes and wedding cakes for people.
Now, is that how you became involved with culinary expertise?
Oh, I just remember watching her.
But you learned a great deal from her, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
A great deal.
I had a good life.
And tell us a little bit more about the farm, and then we want to go to your parents and particularly your dad. Not that the others aren't important, I don't mean that, but he had such a very colorful life all the way through. And well, until the time that he almost, to the time he died, he was very, very active in everything. And tell us a little bit about his, we'll get into this, about his stature and his personality and all that kind of thing, but tell us a little bit more about the farm. You were there about, what, 2 years? You were about 3 or 4 years old when you went to the move to the farm?
Well, I was 2 when we moved in May. And I was still 2, and I wasn't 3 till June, and we moved there. And I only remember that one day when we were going through the basement, I even remember what I had on.
What did you have on?
It was a simple, just little cotton dress that my mother made, or my sister, because I didn't have button clothes. They always made them. And she said, I picked up something, and she said, don't touch that. That's dirty. This place looks like pigs lived here. That's all I remember about that.
And I'm sure that if your mother were there, that did not look like a pigsty.
No.
Because she was an extraordinarily clean woman. As a matter of fact, she had so many beautiful qualities that everyone remembers and talks about. You moved to the farm, and what was the farm like?
It was great.
Tell us
we had everything: chickens, pigs, cows, beef cattle, milking cows, and we had a sugar camp. We made maple syrup. We even had beehives for a while. And Mom sold butter. She made pounds of butter and sold eggs. And like I said, made birthday cakes and wedding cakes for people. And I think it was every year, Carolyn Harder. I always
Carolyn Maffei. Mm-hmm.
They were good friends with my parents, and every year my mother would bake her birthday cake.
And tell
I'd
us
stay
a
all
little
night
bit
with
about
her.
Carolyn Harder's father and mother, too.
They lived up there on the corner of Oak and is that Fairview goes through there?
Fairlawn.
Mm-hmm. Fairlawn. And my dad knew them as young people, her parents.
And what did her father do?
I don't know.
He was
something for the city, wasn't
no,
it?
for the telephone company.
That's it.
Yeah, Star Telephone Company.
Yeah, that's right.
And what was his first name? Do you remember?
I knew before you asked me.
When we come to it, we'll come to it again. You lived on the farm then, and then you were still in the city limits or outside the city limits?
The city limits split our garden in half.
City limits split your garden in half. Where was your house?
There was no sidewalk up to the end of the house where Jerry Hall lived, and then it was just road, no sidewalk there to our driveway, and the city limit sign was right in the middle of what we called the house garden. The farm fields were way out, but Dad always had a garden there.
Right close to the road, well, not too close to the road.
Oh yeah, it was real close to the road.
Now tell us, you mentioned that it was just right where Jerry Hall lived. Jerry Hall built a house there in about 35, 6?
No, he did. I think that house was already there.
Was it there?
Yes, and then that house was moved closer to the farmhouse, and they lived in it there. And Don Parmley built his house. He lived there, and then there was just a space between Jerry Hall.
And tell us the relationship between Jerry Hall and Don Parmley.
He married Jerry Hall's daughter, Irene.
Mm-hmm. So, and her name was?
Her name was Irene.
Irene Hall married Don Parmley, and then they became neighbors. Is that correct?
Right. I don't know where Don and Irene lived before that, and I don't know where Jerry. I was too little.
But Jerry Hall lived down on Walnut Street at one time.
I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know.
So we have Don Parmley and his wife, Irene Hall Parmley, and then immediately north of that we had Jerry Hall and his wife and family, of whom one was Jack Hall. We called him Jackson Hall.
Well, they called him Big Jack and my brother Little Jack because
Big Jack and Little Jack.
Because there was a difference between the sizes, and all our lives we always called him Big Jack.
Big Jack and Little Jack, right. And then your Hall family. So the Halls pretty well dominated that whole area up there, is that right?
Wadsworth.
And Wadsworth.
You were related one way or another.
One way, that's right, to the Halls. How far back did the property go? And do you remember the farmland back there?
Well, it was 112 acres, 116 to begin with. But then he added on further back, and it went almost to Leatherman Road.
Almost to Leatherman Road.
And there was 20 acres of woods.
And from where you lived there on High Street, you could look, if you could see, of course, there's hills and valleys, but if you could look to the end of your property, you would almost see Leatherman Road.
Right.
Now it's one great big mass of houses. But that was
And
all,
the highway.
And the highway, that's right. And it was all farmland at that time. Tell us your fondest dreams of going from the house out through the woods with older brothers and sisters or with friends.
Well, they were so much older than me. See, one brother was 18 when I was born.
Mm-hmm.
I was closest to Jack. In fact, I guess we were kind of inseparable. I was never away from him until he went to the service.
Jack wasn't exactly too young either compared to you. Jack was about 10 years older than you, wasn't he?
No, 2.5.
Was that all?
Well, actually,
I mean, Jackson.
Jackson is.
Jackson, your cousin?
He's
Jackson Hall.
4 or 5
He's 4
years
years older, yeah.
Yeah. But my brother Jack was 2 years and 2 months older than me.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So that little Jack.
Little
okay,
Jack.
Okay. Get these Jacks right. Little Jack and you were inseparable, and you went.
Yeah, we were pretty much together all the time. I guess I thought he was God's gift to me because I did whatever he said.
And you would go through the woods, and you would.
Yeah, we were never in the house very much, except when the weather was too bad.
What about recreation, wintertime recreation?
Oh, winter, sled ride. There was a pond in the back.
Pond. Tell us about the pond. Everyone talks about the pond.
Well, there was two. We had one right just over the edge in the farm, and then there was a pond behind Jerry Hall's house.
And how big were these ponds?
Well, pretty big. They stocked the one Jerry Hall's pond with fish and used to fish there, but the pond behind right over the edge near the house of the farm, it was just the cows would drink there. Mm-hmm. We would jump in there when we were little, but it was kind of dirty, so Dad had to watch us, because it was. And there was a big spring that they never really did find the bottom to it. So
just kept right on?
Yeah, we had to stay away from that end of the pond because he was afraid we would drown, I guess.
How many cows, horses, and things of that nature? What were the names of your horses?
I think at one time, 35 sticks in my head, beef cattle, and I think the most cows that Dad ever milked was 17.
17. All by hand, probably, until...
Well, only at first, and I can't remember when they bought the automatic milker, but Dad was a great fisherman and a hunter, and so when he would go fishing in Canada, my brother and I the hired man would put the milkers on the cow, and Jack and I would take the buckets and dump it in the cans and weigh it and mark it down.
And tell us who the hired man was.
Well, he had lots of them. Somebody said he needed a job in town, so they gave him a job. His name was Bill Everett. And the one that sticks in my mind most was when I was about 12, 13, 14. His name was Bob North, and his mother lived in town. And he was typical John Wayne. Big, tall Texan.
Big, tall, right. I remember the Norths living in town.
Well, I think she had remarried, and her name wasn't North anymore, and she lived right on High Street. And I remember the house, and her face, but I don't remember her married name.
Her new married name. Let's go to the other siblings in your family, and tell us what they did and whom they married and so forth, and where they are today.
Well, Jack married Georgia Houston.
And she was from Wadsworth.
Uh-huh.
And which Houston family was that?
I don't know her dad's name.
What about her brothers?
She had Larry and another brother and a sister Juanita and a sister Evelyn.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can remember.
Okay, and what about, they aren't around here anymore?
Juanita is dead. Her sister's in New Mexico. And I don't know where her brothers are. I see her brother around, so he must be in this area sometime.
All right. Now, with your sister-in-law, however, where is she?
Georgia. They live on High Street. Good Avenue.
On Good Avenue.
Uh-huh.
And that's, you still have contact with them, of course.
Yes,
right.
I see them now and then.
Okay, then the next one.
Ray.
Ray.
He moved to California in about 1953, maybe.
And he was the one who married Marjorie Deem.
And he raised his family out there. They had 8 kids.
And Marjorie Deem's family still lives in town. As a matter of fact, she had a brother who was a policeman.
Fred.
Fred Deem.
Yeah, he's still around. And Tom, I think, lives in Buffalo. He married a Barberton girl, and then she died. And I don't know if he's remarried and if he's still in Buffalo or not.
And Margie, your sister-in-law, still lives in California. She's still alive, is she not?
Oh, yes. She just retired. She's
a beautiful girl, as I remember.
She was secretary at the high school,
Yes, right. Secretary at the high school.
For OJ, she was OJ work secretary.
And for how long was she in the secretary?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I don't know. I just know that she was there when I was 14, so that would be 44. She was working there while Ray was in the service. And then she went out to, let's see, they were married in Missouri, I believe, out west somewhere. She went out there and they got married, and then she came back home till he got out of the service.
And then when he got out of the service, he became a policeman, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And how long was he a policeman?
Well, till he went to California.
Would you have guessed that Jack would have been a policeman? Or Ray that would have been a policeman?
No, because
Why?
He was one of the wild boys in Wadsworth, I guess. He had one of the first motorcycles, an Indian motorcycle. Mm-hmm. And he was a rebel.
Well, you know, we have so many of those people who are just upstanding citizens now, as Ray was, who were kind of rebellious during their boyhood days, but became policemen in Wadsworth and perhaps even officers in the police forces in Wadsworth.
Yep, he was a good policeman, I guess. Everybody
Very good.
said he was.
And he was tough too. I remember him.
He never like they do today, taking the kids to jail for silly things. He would, if they had too much to drink, he would just make them go home. Mm-hmm. Instead, they would run them off to jail. Now I kind of they handle everything differently.
That's
now.
right. There's no more personalized counseling with these kids.
See, everybody knew everybody in Wadsworth.
Well, of course,
and you cared about this kid. You weren't just interested in putting him in jail.
That's right.
You knew he probably knew his parents, so you tried to help him, not just stick him in jail.
That's right,
or
which of course is not terribly much help at all. They had 8 kids, and they are all in California. Mm-hmm. And then let's go the next one up.
Marge, she had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Kaylin
and Margie married
Bradley. Ken Dress. From the dress store.
From dress stores. Uh-huh. And we wanted you to tell a little bit about the dress stores, too, after a few minutes, because they were very close to you.
Grandma Dress was up there for years and years. It was just the home country store.
Did Marge meet her husband at the store, do you think?
I think she met him through my brother. He was at my brother's age, Nelson. They were both the same age.
They were both the same age.
He was a little older than her.
And he was just a little older than she was?
Yes, I think. She was 13 years old, 18, 5 years old.
Where was the dress store geographically? Tell us. North of?
Yeah, the building is gone now. It's where I think Applebee's
restaurant is,
yeah,
right?
It was right in there.
So geographically, it was on the west side of Route 94, north of Route 71, or 76. Mm-hmm. And it was a wooden store. And it was Dress's Market, wasn't it?
She had a kitchen in the back, mm-hmm. and they lived right next door.
Right, they lived next door. And who were the Dresses? And tell us a little bit about the Dresses and who their families were.
I don't know that much about them. There was Don and Ken. They just had 2 boys. And Don went to the service the time that I remember. He was in the service when Ken was home. But Ken mostly worked at the store, and then when Don got out, then he worked at the store too.
And then, did they stay after Marge and he were married? Did they stay at the store?
Oh, yeah, for a long time.
And did Marge work at the store?
Yes, she did.
So you would go up to the store to your sister's place, right?
Well, but see, we moved out of town in 1953, I think, after we got married.
Oh, you did? Mm-hmm. And, but before you were married, you would go up to the store, is that right?
Yeah, we, let's see. When I was I think they were married when I was 7. But Mom, in those days, they delivered groceries.
Yes.
And of course, Dresses didn't, so she dealt mostly downtown. There was a Lorenz grocery store, and mm-hmm. she would have her groceries delivered by Kleckner. He was the grocery boy.
Wasn't he working with Overholt and Freeborn?
Yes, too. But I think he also worked for
It's entirely possible. Bill was just the most affable person in the world. In 1939, he worked for Overholt and Freeborn as a delivery person and drove their first Ford truck panel wagon.
Well, they had a grocery store too, you're saying?
Who? Overholt and Freeborn?
Uh-huh.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, maybe that's who delivered the groceries, but I know the Lorenz grocery store was there where let's see, what's there now? The bakery along in there, because my brother, that was one of his first jobs. Jack's first job was there. Yeah, he worked for the Lorenz grocery store.
What about Nelson?
He became a minister. He married June Hartzler from Rittman.
And which
And-
Hartzler family is that? There are 3, 4 Hartzler families down there. Which
I
one
think
did
they're all related.
All related.
More or less. The house is still there that her parents lived in. And there was a fire, but I think they fixed it up. Was out in the country.
Now,
That's
are they
about all I
related
know.
to the Hartzlers who have the linoleum place?
Guess I don't know that.
But she was a Hartzler, and he
Mm-hmm.
became a minister. And where was he a minister?
For the Grace Brethren Church, and when he started he managed the Acme grocery store on the corner in Rittman. Just before you went up over the hill and just
Right.
when you turned there, it was an Acme grocery store, and he was a manager there. And he met her, and she worked at the telephone office there too. And she had to go to church a lot. Wednesday nights they were church-going people, and so to date her, he had to take her to church. So he started dating her and going to church with her, and then he got interested. He became a custodian at the church, and then he decided to go to seminary.
And he went to the ministry, and he became a minister, and now that was not the same faith to which your family belonged.
No, there was no Methodist church in Rittman, so I was baptized a Presbyterian. Then when we moved to Wadsworth, I was baptized in the Methodist church.
And you've always been Methodist then?
Yes.
Right.
My parents went to the First Christian Church, the red one. It was called the Reformed Church.
Right.
Then they transferred to that, I think, after I was married.
After you were married. Okay. Now, we have Nelson's the oldest one of the family.
Yes.
And what year was Nelson born? Do you remember?
1912.
1912. So if he were still living, he would be 86 years old. And then Marge would be how old? When was she born?
13 years older than me, 8, 9, 10. She's 81.
81, but she was born then in 1919 or 1917?
Yes.
1917. And then who was born next?
Ray.
Ray was born 1921 or 22?
Yes, because he was 1920.
1920. And then
Jack was born in 28.
And then you were born in 28, and you were born in 30. So that takes care of that whole family.
We have another brother that's dead, Charles. He was the second born.
No, I didn't know about Charles.
He died when he was 18 months old with pneumonia.
Oh, well, and so many children died those days.
A long time ago, there wasn't anything they could do for that.
Now, we'll have to kind of hustle because this is such a big family. We might have to have you back twice. Let's talk about the Garns for a little bit. They were a big family in the River Styx area and had a farm out there. Your mother was in the telephone office. And tell us a little bit about the Garns, what you remember about the Garns, and who they're related to in Wadsworth.
She just had a brother and a sister, Orpha and Harv.
And Orpha married who?
She married John Gerbrick.
John Gerbrick.
He
And
was a
John Gerbrick,
bricklayer.
and tell us a little bit about that family.
He was a bricklayer, and then he had a milk route in Cleveland when my mom and dad were married.
And John Gerbrick has children.
Yeah, Gary and Mildred and Francis.
And Gary's gone.
Gary's gone, and the
died.
girls, they're both living, I think, but they live in Worcester,
In Worcester?
around that area. One of the girls is
And
somewhere else.
John Gerbrick had a brother, Ora Gerbrick, in Wadsworth, did he not?
I don't know.
Yeah, Bob Gerbrick's father.
I don't.
John Gerbrick was Ora Gerbrick's brother.
Do you know? I don't know that.
Yeah.
I never knew about him.
I hope I'm right. If I'm not, I'm sure going to get a call from one of the Gerbricks to tell
I didn't know that Uncle
us
John
about that.
had a brother.
Yeah, Ori Gerbrick. As far as I know, now I could be wrong, but I think that's correct. And the Garns, her brother, your uncle, who was your mother's brother,
Harv.
Harv, came to Wadsworth to live also.
They lived on High Street for a while.
On
They
High
lived on
Street.
Gordon, and they lived on College Street.
And then one of the children was Nick Garn.
Nick.
Who was your first cousin.
Yes, he
Right.
and I are the same age.
Exactly? For heaven's sake, same month or the same?
No, just there's a few months difference.
3 months difference. And you went to school together. Of course, we all went to school together with him. And tell us where Nick is now.
He's in South Carolina, North Carolina,
And
maybe
they're-
North Carolina, but his wife is an invalid, and he's thinking about coming back, but he hasn't yet.
To Wadsworth. Now, so far then, there are no Garns people living in Wadsworth.
No.
Garn families living in Wadsworth. In other words, the family, and I hate to say it this way, is pretty well extinguished as far as Wadsworth is concerned.
They had 3 boys, Wally, Nick, and Tom, and Wally and Tom are both dead, and Uncle Harvest is gone and his wife, and there's just Nick and I. And, well,
that's
just
all
Nick
that's
left of that Garn family.
Of the Garn family. Therefore, you have no Garn relatives in Wadsworth anymore.
Well, way back on my grandmother's side, we're related to the Smiths, you know, Susie Smith and Linda.
Susie Smith?
Yeah, our grandmothers are somehow related. I don't know if they were sisters or they married brothers. See, they're so much older, but they quit talking about them by the time I came out. Yes.
Susie Smith, Linda Smith, and the fourth one.
Patty.
Patty Smith, yeah.
Yeah, she's gone now.
Yeah, she died, poor thing, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. Not long.
From the nursing home.
Yes, she was at Magnolia.
Magnolia, I couldn't think of the word, yeah. She died as a young girl. And Susie and Mary Lou and Linda are still living.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone knows all of them. They're just the greatest kids in the world, and probably one of the most scintillating people I've ever met in my life is Susie Smith. You know, she just absolutely, and she's related to you then somewhat.
Mm-hmm. Through the grandmothers.
Through the grandmothers.
On the Garn, through my grandmother Garn, but they were so long ago. See, which my grandmother died when I was just little, and she was already 82 because I was born so late. Mm-hmm. So they quit talking about the old people after a while, and so I don't know.
Don't remember that thing.
Where the relation comes in there.
I was talking with one of our people here the other day after the program, and he was telling us about this one family who was good friends of theirs. And I said, well, you know, you are their first cousin. He said, I never knew that. And the man is 73 years old. He never knew that this other family was his first cousin. Because in Wadsworth, we just knew each other so well. And if you're related, it didn't make any difference because you played together, you went to school together and so forth. And in your case, you could have married somebody who would have been your cousin.
That almost happened in our family.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would like to avoid names, but they never told the ones they were cousins. And they went to high school together in Wadsworth and started dating and getting serious, so the family had to tell them, you're cousins.
Oh, boy. Wow. What a blow.
Yeah, that was bad. That was after I graduated. That was in the 60s, I think, or 70s.
No kidding. That's a real blow. And you don't want to mention names, and I can respect that. But that's a story in itself.
Yeah.
Laura, tell us a little bit more about the Garn farm out in River Styx.
I don't
remember
know
that?
about it. See, I was too little.
Too little for that.
Yeah, it was too long ago.
Then let's go
Mother
here.
had to quit school because her dad died young, and
How'd he die?
he had a brain tumor.
What happened?
A chair was pulled out from under him at a square dance, and he bumped his head in the back, and a tumor grew from that.
And he died.
Mm-hmm.
We were always admonished never to pull a chair out from anyone because it could be very, very dangerous. And to this day, I'm scared to pull it. Well, I don't think I ever pull a chair out from anyone, but you know, it always bothers me when I see that slapstick humor kind of a thing. But it is not humorous at all.
Speaking of square dancing, we had a big party when they built our barn up there. Everybody in town came.
Oh yes, tell us about that.
Because
the barn burned down, right? The first one?
Do you know, I can't remember. I was too little. Why they built a new one?
In 1937, the barn burned down.
Well, that could be, but I don't remember that.
Yeah, and the fire department, instead of going to the barn, went to Jerry Hall's truck barn.
Yeah, see, that has eluded me.
The barn burned down, and then you built a new barn. And tell us about that big barn. That was in the paper even.
It was so big that everybody said that they would never fill it with the crops. He could never. Well, it overflowed.
Oh, of course it would,
yeah,
sure.
And so they had to sell some of it because it wouldn't fit in.
Do you remember the square dance that they had at the barn?
I remember that.
Tell us about it.
Everybody was there. The floor was just beautiful, you know, the hardwood floor. They had, typical like you see in movies, they had bales of straw here and there to sit on, and the fiddle and all that stuff.
All of those people, they all came to the barn dance.
It was fun.
I'm not positive. I think my brothers went to that.
They could have.
Yeah. See, that would have been 1937. They would have been 17 years old at the time. And I know that they were friends with your older sister and brother. As a matter of fact, they went to school together. And something because I remember the barn dance.
Yeah, it
the
was
Hall's barn dance, and they played turkey in the straw.
Oh, everything. It was just like it's just like the movies.
I can just remember that as if it were yesterday. That had to be 1937, 38, somewhere in that area.
No, I remember that, but I can't remember anything about
They had Turkey in the Straw. My brother came home and they played. And as a matter of fact, my brother was one of the fiddlers.
Really? That's
I'm almost
possible.
positive. Because he played violin, and they asked him to play Turkey in the Straw.
And they had cider, to drink.
How many people
Didn't
were
have
there,
pop.
do you think?
Oh, gosh, I have no idea. I was too little to realize how big it was.
To a little person, it probably seemed like huge
It
numbers of
seemed
people.
big,
But it was hundreds of people, I'm sure.
People, to change the subject a little bit, but talking about in a sort of the same way, the people used to come from Wadsworth too to help keep my dad awake when he was boiling syrup, because once it starts, you have to stay with it until it's finished or it gets crystalline.
Tell us about boiling syrup and why he was boiling syrup and what kind of syrup it was and where
With
you got
maple
it.
syrup. And so when he had to go through the night, it was hard to stay awake. So they would have parties, and we would boil hot dogs and hard-boiled eggs in the syrup in the first tray. You could do that before it started becoming thick, and to keep him awake till midnight or a little later, and then he could stay awake better till it was finished.
And you remember doing that?
Oh yeah, that was older then.
You were older then. What? How much syrup did they make, do you think? You remember how they got the syrup?
What do you mean?
How did they tap the trees?
Oh yeah, I helped gather the
How did they do it? Tell us.
With horse and wagon.
Horse and wagon.
Yeah, and the buckets, and we had the buckets on the tree, and then you pour it in a tank.
And then you boil it. How did you boil it?
Well, in a big open pit, and it was long, I would guess at least 10, 15 feet long, and they had the big pans, 3 big pans. There were 3 stages. You put in the first one, and then when it was at a certain point, then it drained off into the next one, and then the final pan was the syrup.
That was the syrup. And do you remember eating it?
Oh, it was great.
It was great.
Yeah,
That's right.
good maple syrup.
Just a little bit heavy on the calories, though.
Yeah. And they made their own apple butter. And remember stirring that pot.
No one has talked about apple butter. Tell us how we made apple butter.
Cut the apples up, put them in the big bucket and water, and boil it.
And how long did it take to cut the apples up? Would there be a party for that too?
No, Mom and did most of that.
And how did you peel the apples?
She peeled them by hand at first, but then somebody gave her a little peeler about this tall that you turned the crank.
You put the apple on, turned the crank, and it peeled the apple, and then you would have to quarter it.
Yeah, core it.
Core it and quarter it.
Yeah.
And then you just put that into the... And how many apples would it take?
I don't know.
Tons of apples.
Yeah, because it boils down,
It boils down to almost, but it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so
We
good.
had apples and peaches and pears in the orchard.
Apples, peaches, and pears.
It wasn't a huge one. It was just a small one beside the house.
But it was big enough that you had enough for apple butter and things like that.
Well, one year, she sent, my brother and I were getting on her nerves. I guess she wanted to get rid of us for a few hours. She sent us to the basement to count her canned goods. And I remember it was 700 cans.
700 cans.
She canned meat, soup, tomato juice. I never had pop. She made grape juice. We bottled our own grape juice. And peaches, pears, and it was vegetable soup, sausage, all kinds of fruit, anything. Corn,
we had the same
beans.
thing, obviously, because during the Depression, if you raised your food, you could eat during the winter. If you didn't raise your food, you couldn't. We raised our own food, and we had 3 pigs all the time, and we had vegetables. And then one of the things that really augmented the numbers of cans that we had was that since we were Italian, we had tomato sauce. And it was not unlikely for my mother to make 400 cans of tomato sauce for an entire year.
That sounds right.
Yeah, 400 cans. So we would have about 1,500 cans of bottles or jars or whatever they were.
So you had more than we did.
Well, only because of the tomato sauce. Because for spaghetti, you have to have 3 of them a week, and you had it every single week, twice a week. So it'd be 6 a week. So over the period of 6 months, 6 24s, and by 6, approximately 100. You'd have to have 125 or 30 quarts, just for that part alone. And then you would have to wait until you'd have to have it through the summer too, because the tomatoes wouldn't be ripe. So you're talking 9 months of let's say 25 bottles. a month or more, sometimes sometimes more. So that's why we had that many. But we had probably the same thing. We canned pork just as your people did, and that was good in the wintertime. It was very, very good. As a matter of fact, that's all you had.
Well, she always had to have some kind of canned meat. She was very seldom sick, but I remember a couple times she got sick and was down in bed maybe a couple days, and I knew what we were going to get to eat if Dad fixed it. He opened a can of sausage, and we had sausage and home fries to eat.
And that was what you had.
Yeah, because that's what he could make the best.
We're going to run out of time, and I want to hear more about your dad and what he did here in town and all of the activities with which he was associated. Tell us, first of all, about his personality, his stature, and his drive.
Well, he was a quiet man, slow to anger. We were never allowed to fight. I never had a spanking. My mother said I was never spanked in my life. None of us ever were. If he opened his mouth, you did it.
Period.
And she said he never raised his voice, but if he said something, we never questioned it. We just did it.
Just did it.
And I remember he used to say, I remember saying why once about something, and he says, why? He says, because I told you so. You don't do as I do, you do as I tell you to do, because I make mistakes. He used to say that. And he was short. They always called him Shorty Hall. And he was really, by today's terms, laid back. On the township trustees, I remember I was in the room one time when he came home early from a meeting. And my mother asked him why, and he says, because they were fighting. So she never questioned anything. It was his business. So the time for the next meeting, I was in the room when they called. And she says, Raymond, are you going to the meeting? They promised they won't fight anymore. But he just wouldn't tolerate that. He left, and when we asked him about that, he says, well, they were fighting, so I just got up and left.
He was a very Pacific kind of a person.
Yeah,
tell us tell us more about the township trustees, what they did, and who were the other township trustees were, and the township clerk, and so forth.
Well, it was held at Leibert's house, who was related to the Halls. He had married a Hall, but then his second wife was Ines. And they always had the meetings at their house.
And the reason for that was what?
Oh, he was
crippled.
Well, yes, he was in a wheelchair, but
not Homer Leibert. Herb Leibert, yeah.
That was Janie's dad.
Jane Leibert's father, and she had 3 brothers. Or no, 2 brothers and a sister, didn't she?
Yeah, but they were to his first wife.
That's right. Janie was the only one from this family. And Janie Leibert's mother was Ines Leibert.
She was a Canadian lady. She was she was from Canada. She was a very nice lady.
Oh, sweetheart of a person.
She took good care of him.
Yes, she did. He was in a wheelchair, but he was also a nice, really a nice person.
When he was, before he was in a wheelchair, he was tall and slim and handsome man. And
his first wife was Jerry Hall's
something. I don't know.
Not a sister, but a relation.
I don't know where that comes in. I just know.
We'll find out tonight. I'll get a phone call.
Somebody will tell you.
I had a person who called the other night, and she said, I have 20 pages of comments that I'm going to make on your programs. And that isn't unlikely. I had one lady who called one day, and she sent me the letter the following day with 3 pages of
corrections?
Well, they weren't so much corrections, they were additions, you know. You forgot to say this about that person.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because this is not a finished product. What we're doing here for the Historical Society is gathering the data so that when someone sits down to write the history, they'll have all of these, you know, when we're gone, every one of our memories are going to be gone too. So, you know, we have to get them now while we still have them.
Well, he helped put out the fire. You know, Hull Trucking burned that in the early 30s, and I remember seeing him up on top there. He was a gutsy man. He was small, and you know,
he's very gutsy.
Short, you know, kind of feisty sometimes, and he would do anything. He was not afraid, and nobody would climb up there. But him and Mr. Hood, do you remember him?
Yes, surely.
They went up there before the roof caved in to try to put it out. And then they would call him, the fire department would call him for risky things. A woman had tied a sack of coal around her head and walked out in the pond behind the hospital, and they called him, come and get her out, nobody wants to touch her. So he went
down there.
Well, I wasn't allowed to go near, but he let me sit in the car. I think I was at his elbow from the time I was born.
Now, tell us a little bit about his gutsiness.
One time he was bet that he couldn't sit in a Indian position with his legs crossed and raise this 300-pound woman on his shoulders. Well,
He did
as soon
it.
as you told him he couldn't do it, he could do it. He did it.
He has a real inspiration. I worked with your father on the as a township trustee. I was not a township trustee.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, but he was also on the zoning board of appeals.
Yes, and the
And-
cemetery board.
And the cemetery board, for years on the cemetery board. But the zoning board of appeals, this is way back in the early mid-50s or so, 50, 55, 60, somewhere in that area. I worked with him. And his homework was always done, always done. And a computer could not have been more inflexible in terms of the facts. I mean, if the facts were these, they were the facts. And he wouldn't have cared if you, the girl who was right at his elbow from the time that you were born, if you wanted something that he thought was wrong, you wouldn't get it.
Right.
And that was all there was to it. He was just as fair a man as anyone could possibly. You may not agree with him,
No.
but he was extremely fair and completely inflexible when it came to, you must do it the right way, and that's all there is to it.
There was two things he always said he would never discuss, especially with friends. Is politics and religion, because it'll end in a fight.
And he doesn't want to.
He would never discuss those two subjects ever.
We're
And he
gonna-
was not quick to judge a man. He repeated that thing about the Indians so long
Yeah.
until I walked in a
then-
man's shoes for 2 weeks. I will not judge him. And
Not judge him.
He didn't care what you were. He was not prejudiced in any way, or where you came from, or what color you were. But Lee, don't try to change me.
Don't mess with me.
Don't, right. I have my way too, and I respect yours, and you must respect mine.
That's right, exactly. Tell us a little bit about your own family. We're going to lose our time here. And tell us a little bit about your own family. You went to high school, you graduated, and then what happened?
I married Pat Hayth. He was in the Navy. When he got out of the Navy, then we got married. And he went to work for a company. Well, he went to school at Kent. And while he was in Kent, he worked for a company part-time called Eastern Central Motor Carriers. It was a tariff bureau. And so they asked him to work in the office. He was there as a janitor when he was going to school. So they said, well, if you quit, and we will put you in the office, and we promise that your education not finishing it won't hold you back. Well, it did. Eventually, he found out that people with the piece of paper could pass him up. So he went back to school and got a degree. Then he went to work for Roadway. He worked for Eastern Central 17 years, I think. And then he went to work for Roadway and retired from there.
Right. And your your children?
We have Scott and Sean and Valerie. Scott is 43, Sean is 42, and Valerie is 37. But you see, there's more space there. We didn't do that again.
Right.
That's too close. It's worse than twins.
Too close is right. How close together are the first two?
About 15 months.
My brothers were 11 months apart.
That's too close.
Oh, you bet. You bet. Tell us where they are, and then we want to get a little bit into about Pat's
Scott
family.
lives on off of Hametown Road at Harper at Norton. Sean lives in Worthington outside of Columbus. And Valerie lives in Caldwell Falls.
Okay. And Pat's family, tell us who they were, where they lived, and how you met him, and all of that.
Well, his dad retired from the Goodrich, and they lived in Akron when they first came up here from Jackson, Ohio. And then they moved to Wadsworth in 1943, lived out in the country at a couple different places, and then his parents, when he was in the Navy, moved down to Treese Road.
Right.
They built a little house on there.
Well, when they first came from Jackson, they moved to where?
Let's see, in Akron.
No, I mean to Wadsworth.
To Wadsworth. They moved from Akron to Wadsworth, and they lived, they lived on 105 out there by Yoder Road, isn't that out there? And then they worked on Williard's farm. They worked his farm for him for a period of time.
The Williard farm.
And that's off of
49.
Yeah.
Williards are on 49, were they not?
You have to drive back in off
Yeah.
of. Is it 224? I forget.
Well,
the extension.
Right. Williard was he owned the Wadsworth Lumber, or had something to do with the
Williard Lumber Company.
Williard's Lumber Company?
Yeah.
But
And he owned this farm, and so Pat's parents worked it.
And then didn't the Hayths also live out in Clark's Corners at one time?
Yes, I believe you're right, that was the first place they lived.
Yeah, and
then they moved to the country
Do you
because...
remember where in Clark's Corners?
Yes, the house with the pillars.
Right, and which one was that?
That's on the east side, and I think it's still there.
Yes, it is. It's geographically about, 300 feet, or maybe 500 feet before you start going around the big curve on the east side of the road. And they sold it to a family who was related to the Hoaglands in some way. The wife was a daughter of Ruth Hoagland's cousin. Now,
Okay.
that's pretty remote, but I can't remember that name though.
I don't know that
gone.
part of it.
But that was the house with the pillars. And that's just everyone knows the house with the pillars up there. They lived there. Now, Pat was quite an athlete. When he was
Played
young.
football,
Played
basketball,
and
softball, baseball.
all of those things. And he's a good athlete too. And he had an older brother and a younger brother. Tell us about the older brother.
Chet is the older brother who became a state patrolman.
State patrolman, and of course he's gone now.
He was lieutenant colonel of state patrol when he died, and Ron lives in Michigan.
And Chet died probably in the 60s, wasn't it?
He was 65.
65.
And he's 3 years older than Pat.
Yeah. And Pat now, Pat was born, what, 28, 29?
Yeah, Pat's a year older than me. He's 69.
So he was born 29?
29.
Mm-hmm. And Ron was born, I guess,
He's 3 years younger than Pat.
When a person is 67 years old or 65 years old, we don't call him Ronnie anymore.
We do.
Ron Hayth. And Ron was...
Well, Big Ron and Little Ron, because he has a son named Ron, so we call him...
Well, Big Ron, that is the father, the one who was 65 years old, was quite an athlete himself.
Yeah, he played football.
You bet he did. He's tougher than nails.
He's bigger than Pat.
Yes.
Quite a bit bigger.
Well, Pat was stocky.
Yeah, he was stocky, but he wasn't very tall.
But no one would want to mess with Pat when he was in school. The man was tough.
He was kind of quiet about that, too. He wasn't much of a fighter.
But he was
No. It's just like my dad said, it takes a smart man to keep from fighting.
You bet.
Anybody can fight.
And he was very well respected in school. Of course, we remember him because he was older than we were, and therefore we respected him for that. But he was very well respected and very popular. And how did you meet him?
In school.
How?
Because his name was Hayth and mine was Paul, and he always sat behind me and aggravated me to death.
Oh, I'm sure that's the way that those romances start.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first date?
Yes.
Tell us about that, and what kind of a car was it he drove in the first date?
He drove his sister's old beat up something or other. Nobody had very cars in those days.
No, that's right. It was a 36 Ford Coupe.
Yes, that the door was wired on.
Yes.
And his sister lived in Barberton. Her name was Elsie. She married a Barberton policeman named Bob Brooks. And anyway, her son just became a captain in the State Patrol last week.
Oh, is that right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So real proud of that.
We've made a lot of inroads in the patrol, and also a lot of inroads in the police force.
The whole family kind of had the trucking business and the security business sewed up. There were police and the religion. Policemen, ministers, and truck drivers.
Got them all sewed up. And wonderful people as well. We have a few more minutes left, and I want to go back to your dad again. A Renaissance man. First and foremost, he was a very strict father. He had 5 great kids, and one died though.
But
right?
you wouldn't know that he was strict. I mean, it was a quiet,
Well, I did.
quiet way about him.
I did.
You probably knew him as well as I did, being going to those meetings.
Well, he typified the old time. He was born, what, 1891, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He typified that era of people where there was no nonsense.
Exactly, and he always said, I don't wear my heart on my sleeve, so nobody knew where he stood emotionally.
No, very, very stern, but a loving person.
Yeah.
He reared five great children, who, of course, right there's a legacy that, there's no greater legacy that a man can leave, or a person can leave, than an educated and wonderful family, and that's what he did. Besides that, then he served to work through a horrible era, the Depression, and you said that he did absolutely everything, from
Policeman, fireman.
fireman.
He helped build the boxboard. He was a carpenter.
Carpenter, whatever.
Machinist, whatever.
Whatever needed to be done. Married a mother who did the same identical thing, and reared a family through this horrible era. And then became civic-minded. And before we leave that, we talked about Herb Liebert and Ines Liebert. And who else was the trustee? There were 3 trustees. Herb, your dad, and who's the third one? Do you remember?
I don't
I can't remember that either. But I do remember that the foreman, or the person who's in charge of all of the roads.
Chairman, I guess you'd call him.
Yeah, in charge of the roads was Aaron Hollinger.
Yes, I remember that now that you say the name.
Yeah, Aaron Hollinger. He was an old, well, of course, he was born in 1872, so he would be up there in years, about 26 years old now, if he were living. Died on September 8th, 1965. I remember that.
Yeah, see, we were out of town then, so I don't remember those
he
things.
died, that's when he died. But he was the road, they call him the road, not the engineer, but the person in charge of the roads for years and years and years. Then his son, Loyal Hollinger, took it over.
I remember that name, too.
And after Loyal Hollinger took it over, these are the township roads, then Gay West became involved.
No, you're beyond me.
Yeah,
We weren't in
and
town
from
then.
that point, I've kind of halfway forgotten some of the people, but we need to get that for historical evidence too, because the township is a very important part of our city. And the 3 township trustees governed an area which was about 3 or 4 times larger than the city of Wadsworth. Now, they didn't have the population because people lived far and wide, but it was a very difficult thing to do. They maintained all of the roads and took care of the responsibilities there, but mostly it was roads more than anything else. And I can't think of the third trustee's name, but I bet we'll get a phone call tonight and we'll get the third trustee.
Remind you.
You bet, and that's great. What did he do on the cemetery board? And describe that cemetery board a little bit to us during that period of time. We had Marcella Opliger Rock on here the other day, whose father was the sexton, and whom at that time we called the gravedigger. But do you remember his relationship with Fred Opliger?
Not very much, other than that he would just mention his name and things. They maintained the cemeteries.
And they did a beautiful
control
job.
the mowing and what you could put there and what you couldn't. And see, I was getting to be up in the teenagers then, so you don't pay much attention to what's going on at home,
You had other
like you
things
do
in
when you
mind.
were smaller. So
You had some other things in your mind at that time.
Yeah.
Right. Tell us a little bit about your high school days, because you were also very popular. What did you do, and what kinds of things were noteworthy?
well, nothing was really noteworthy.
come on now, Laura.
I remember going to grade school at Lincoln, and I was the only country kid in the school
And why?
because I didn't ride the bus.
Why
I
didn't you ride the
walked.
bus? You walked one
But
full
there was no
mile.
kindergarten at Centralized.
Right.
And Mother was, I think, was trying to get me out of the house as soon as she could, and I could just walk to school. And so I walked to Lincoln, and I didn't at the time realize that I was different than the other kids, because when you're little, you're just interested in friendship. But I look at the pictures now and I think, oh, the way I dressed, because my clothes were all made, and all the other little girls had ruffles and long curls, and here I had this Buster Brown thing. But at the time, I didn't realize that, and it was fun. I enjoyed that. Then when they found out I had a pony, I had lots of
There
friends.
you had a lot of friends then.
Yes.
And after you went to Lincoln, then you went to
Down to high school.
Down to high school.
But I had to walk there too. I didn't ride the bus.
So it's a mile every
It was a
single-
mile for the driveway, and then the milkman delivered milk, and he'd let me ride on the milk truck if it was
Who
really
was the
snowing.
milkman at the time?
I don't know.
What milk truck was it?
Was it downtown, Smith Dairy.
Smith Dairy.
Yeah.
Could have been Irish Hope.
Oh, that sounds right.
Could-
That sounds right.
Probably
Yeah.
so. He's the type of person what a great person he was. Quickly, give us a little bit more of a background of your own life. You're too humble to say that you were not heavily involved in school. What kinds of things did you promote, and what kinds of things did you
Well,
do?
I was a twirl at the head.
Okay, let's tell about
And
that.
I was reserve cheerleader. That was before you became a majorette. You were in this group called the Twirlets.
Twirlets.
And I was in the band 2
In the
years.
band.
I played drums. I went out for a majorette, but I didn't have nerve enough to get up there and do that. So I said, I would rather be in the band. I don't want to be a majorette.
Who were the majorettes at the time? Do you remember?
Pat Kent.
Pat Kent.
Nancy Flack.
Nancy Flack.
Elenor Fixer.
Elenor Fixler. Mary
and
Long.
Mary Long.
Mary Long. Who else?
And Joanne Snyder.
Joanne Snyder, right. They were the majorettes, and you would have been a good one, but you didn't want to do it.
No, I just didn't have, I was just too embarrassed. I couldn't do that.
Elnora, you know, this has been such a delight to talk with you because, of course, everyone I've interviewed on this program, and I think you're close to, I think you are number 157 or 8 or something like that.
Oh, whoa.
Of the ones I've interviewed, I've known every person. Therefore, I relive these moments, and I reliving these past few minutes, this past hour actually, with you on these things, and they're such a delight to hear them. But beyond the delight, you know, there is a legacy that the Halls have left in Wadsworth and will continue to leave. And it'll be held here for a long, long time because it was the goodness and the strength and the power and the directness of what your family did that is going to be remembered.
Well, my dad was not a perfect man. He'd be the first one to admit it, but he was a good man.
He was a very good man, and that's what this Wadsworth is made up, and we want to thank you for not only being on the program, but for also the legacy that you've left Wadsworth. Thank you very much, Elenora.